Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah Graham from the YWCA National Capital Area. I'm the Manager of Communications and Advocacy here. I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining us tonight for our courageous conversation, which is women in politics, running for office, and getting a seat at the table. If everyone could take just about 2 seconds and make sure that their lines are muted. Thank you. As we all know, women can and will get it done. They just need a seat at the table. So today we've brought together 3 women who are elected officials, one each from DC, Maryland, and Virginia, to discuss a little bit about why they decided to run for office, how they organized, and what you can do if you want to get a seat at the table as well. The conversation, for folks that are new around here, the conversation runs about an hour or so with 35 to 45 minutes of panel discussion and then 15 minutes to 20 minutes of audience participation. During this discussion, please feel free to add any questions you have in the chat. Also, as we get started here, would love to have you introduce yourselves, say why you're here, and what you hope to learn. Want to go over a few rules of engagement, as I like to say. One, feel free, as I said, to share questions in the chat, but make sure that your lines are muted when the panel discussion is happening. We'll be sure to open them all up at the end of the Q&A. We are also, as a friendly reminder, a 501c3 organization, so all the information shared here will be nonpartisan. And now I want to introduce our lovely CEO, Ms. Monica Gray, and she will get our panel started. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah. And thanks everyone for joining us this evening. I suspect that several of you have joined us before for our courageous conversations, but for the benefit of those of you who have not, we established this series about 3.5 years ago, wanting to take an opportunity to look at ways of having more community engagement about the challenges of racial justice and inequity in our community, and finding a way to do it in a setting that was really inviting. And so, given the guidance of some of our sister agencies around the country, we established these courageous conversations, which were an opportunity to bring people together around the dinner table in the evening to talk about some difficult conversations around race and equity. And for the past 3 years, we had had great success in having those conversations. They were very rich and very robust. And when the pandemic hit, we took a moment. Like many people, we tried to pray away the pandemic and hope that it would be gone by the middle to end of last year. And now that we are no longer pandemic novices, we know that is not how they work. And so we brought them online, what we hope temporarily, and to continue some important conversations, but hoping to bring them back to in-person settings as soon as it's safe to do so. But for Women's History Month, we always try to focus on issues surrounding women and women leaders and the challenges that we continue to face as we continue our march toward equity in this country. Before we get started, though, before I talk a little bit more about this evening's event, I also wanted to take a moment to reflect and a moment of silence in honor of those who we have lost over the past week. I think a week ago, we were jarred out of what had been a fairly long stretch from the sadness that has become all too normalized in our country of mass killings. As we slowly crawl out of the pandemic, there are many things that I think many of us hope that we leave behind from the old normal. And many things we look forward to back in our new normal. But one of the things that I think we all hoped we had left behind, but sadly, we were reminded last week that we are not behind, is hate-based crime. And many of you saw our reflection last week about the killings in Atlanta. And as we continue to process a crime that seems to be, spreading across both hate and gender, racial hate and gender bias, we're now confronted with another mass killing in Colorado. Once again, have lost 10 people. And so I wanted to take just a moment of silence, but adding to that and sort of stepping that up, a moment of silent reflection where we also make a commitment to ourselves that at the end of this conversation, we take an opportunity to have picked something up from the women leaders that we hear from about what we can do. Now, they will not speak specifically to what's going on, but what they will do is reflect and share with us their reasons for moving forward and stepping into positions of leadership. And so as is often the case when we're confronted by these horrible situations, we feel overwhelmed and a bit powerless and wonder, what can I do? I'm just a citizen, and hopefully we'll leave this evening empowered to do something in our community that will bring an end to these mass killings and hate-based violence and crime. So if we could just take a moment of silence. Thank you. So this evening, as we celebrate, as we head toward the end of Women's History Month, we have the privilege of being hosting several women leaders who are going to talk to us about their experiences. So one of the things I think we are all grateful for is that we are now celebrating having our first elected woman vice president, and having a record number of women in Congress, as well as women in elective office around the country. But even with that celebration of those record numbers, we also have to reflect on the fact that in 2020, as we celebrated 100 years of women having the right to vote, while women are more than half of this nation's population, we are far less than that in elective office. And so one of the things we want to really do is create a space for women to talk about running for office and really encourage more women to consider that as an option. I think one of the things, and I've shared this with our panelists, is one of the things that sometimes I think overwhelms people in general, but women in particular, is when you look at, as we come off of a national election, some of us are confronted by how harsh it is and how dirty it is and how it often seems like that's not the kind of place I want to find myself, but also the cost. And so often you see all these commercials, and I know often you'll have folks who are interested in running for office and they find themselves thinking, well, I don't have that ability to pay for all those commercials. But there are many places where one can run for office and get known in one's community and build one's reputation to create an opportunity to run for office and really have an impact, because as we all know, the work gets done at the local level, and the greatest impacts are at the community level. And so we brought together this panel of women leaders to talk about their experience, what motivated them to run, what they hope to get accomplished in their elected office, and some words of wisdom to encourage other women to do the same. And so if we could take a minute and just have our panelists introduce themselves, talk a little bit about who they are, what office they hold, and what encouraged them to run for office. And we'll start with, well, first I'll just introduce everyone. So Kate Kennedy is the city council member in College Park, Maryland. Alex Appah is an ANC commissioner in Ward 3 here in Washington, D.C. And Letty Hardi is a city council member in Falls Church, Virginia. So ladies, you can decide who wants to go first.
Since you listed me first, I can go first. Hi, I'm Kate Kennedy. Thank you. First, thank you to the YWCA for hosting this and for hosting these conversations. I'm looking forward to hearing more in the future as well. To answer part of your question first, I have been involved with women's organizations my entire career up until this last place I've worked at, but I've worked at the Girl Scouts, the League of Women Voters, never the YWCA, but I've seen your amazing work from organizations very close by and love everything you're doing. So thank you so much. I am, as Monica mentioned, one of the city council members in College Park, Maryland. We are just tucked inside the Beltway, a little bit, just a few miles north of DC. We are the home of the University of Maryland, which is a blessing, and some people think it's a curse. I think it's a blessing. I am one of 8 council members. We This is not a full-time gig. This is a part-time position for us. There are 8 council members, 1 mayor. My full-time job is actually, I'm a fundraiser, and I see a couple of well-known local fundraisers on the call. So love to see you all here. And work currently for a Share Our Strength and Don't Get Hungry campaign, working on food security, with a huge issue right now. So I ran for the first time in 2017, and which was a competitive race, and then ran for re-election again in 2019. So I can talk a little bit if people are interested in that. The competitive race, the second time I ran, I was unopposed, which was delightful. And really enjoy being on the council. I'm not sure if I'm addressing everything I'm supposed to at this point. Am I good? Is that good? And okay, great. So I'll stop there and more later. Thanks.
I'm happy to go next. Hi, everybody. My name is Alex Appa. I serve as Ward 3 Commissioner on the Advisory Neighborhood Commission here in DC. If you are from either Virginia or from Maryland, you might not be familiar, but the ANC is it's an elected position. However, it really represents it's a hyper local position. So as commissioner, I represent about 2,000 constituents, and I work on issues anywhere from trash issues all the way to affordable housing issues across the city. So it's a pretty exciting role because it really is super, super local. And my background is actually in public health. I've been working in healthcare for about 15 years. I currently work for United Healthcare / Optum. And so, part of the reason why I've been interested in I've always been interested in public service and community service, and equity, health equity. All of these issues have always been important to me in my career. So, later I'm sure we'll get into more reasons why I ran, but that's just a little bit about me, and I'll pass the mic to Letty.
Hi, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for the YWCA for hosting this and inviting us. I'm Letty Hardi. I am one of 7 council members in the City of Falls Church. We are an independent jurisdiction in Virginia. We are about 6 miles from DC, kind of hidden between Arlington and Fairfax County, but we are independent, so unlike our neighbor jurisdictions, which are much bigger than us. I am my second term, so I first ran for council in 2015 and then was reelected in 2019, so just started my second term in 2020. And I'll just leave you with a kind of bit of an opener, is that I feel like I am always the last person to ever run for public office. I'm an introvert. I'm a mom of 3 young kids. And so all those different things make it seem like such an uphill and atypical job to take. But I encourage you that if those fit descriptions of what you want in your life, that it is totally open possibility for you as well.
Thanks, Letty. And this actually will touch back on that because it really, my first question is the obvious one. Why did you run for office, and what are your main inspirations for doing so?
I'm happy to just keep going if that's, since I have unmuted currently. So like I said, I am an introvert, last person to ever run, but Falls Church has been home for my family for a long time. My husband actually grew up in the city of Falls Church, so this has been home for him for 40 years. I had actually paused my career. So I was a financial service executive until I had 3 kids under the age of 5. And after having 3 little ones, I'm like, gosh, I can't juggle motherhood and a full-time job. And so I paused my career and just stayed at home for a couple of years. And so when my youngest was about 3 years old, I just started paying attention to local politics. My oldest started attending kindergarten. So I really wanted to be aware of where my budget dollars were going. And so I started going to city council meetings. And at Monday nights at 7:30, I went to my first meeting and I looked around and I'm like, wait, no one else here looks like me. Certainly no one of color, certainly no one under the age of 60, I would have to say. We're having these conversations. And these are all really, really important ones. Everything from where, when the library gets new books, to sidewalks, to funding sidewalks, to affordable housing, to your property tax rate, to traffic, to the environment. And I just did not see myself represented up there. And so I thought that, gosh, maybe this is important for me to jump in. And so despite the fact that, like I said, I am the last person to do this sort of job, I had no political aspirations of my own. While I worked in student council in college, I was always more the behind the scenes person as opposed to the one who wanted to be on stage. But I just didn't see myself represented. And I said, what the heck? This is kind of like being in the PTA, right? And so I threw my hat in the ring. A good friend of mine was actually running to be on the school board at the same time. So it certainly helped to have a friend who was going through this, because running for public office does seem very daunting. And so we were both young moms and we decided to give it a chance, and we got elected and started serving in 2016. So that's the quick gist of it for me.
Yeah, and I'm happy to go in reverse order, I guess. So I lived in Baltimore for about 9 years. And during that time, I got really interested, especially, I know we're nonpartisan, but especially during the Trump administration, I just became very, very active in politics and local politics and national politics. And so, but I ended up moving from Baltimore to DC. So my plan was to run for office there, but that didn't work out because I moved due to work. And so I didn't decide to run right away here in DC because I was like, DC just seems like such a huge and like political animal. And I was like, I didn't know how to get involved. And actually, I'm a newly elected commissioner. My term just started in January. And so last summer, there were flyers about the ANC, and I happened to run into one of the women who put up the flyers, and she's like, you should run, like just run. And my husband had been asking me, and over the years, people had asked me to run several times. I probably have been asked at least 15 times to run. And I was always like, nah, like, no, I don't know how to do that. Not me, not me, not me. And finally, I was just like, I'm going to do it. And so, I gathered petitions and, did campaigning. And I also ran unopposed, but I need to have some level of presence. And I just decided, like, why not me? That really just became my answer, especially after all of the wave, like the AOCs of the world, with Kamala Harris, all of that. I was just like, it's time for me to step up and do something for my community and stop talking about it and stop just tweeting about it or whatever. It was time to really like be the change, if you will. So that's part of the reason why I decided to run, and it's been great so far. And I'll pass to Kate.
Thank you. I love that. You're actually reminding me of, I had completely forgotten that it's not a coincidence that I ran in 2017 and the election of 2016 happened less than a year before that. That's not a coincidence. Though my original inspiration, or my original, I am going to run for local office happened two reasons. One, the current mayor asked me, which I think that's a theme that happens a lot, is people get asked. And two, there was a vote around hanging the gay pride flag at City Hall, and we're districted. So the two people that represented my district voted against it. And I thought, no, this is no, I'm not standing for this. I will be running against these folk. I don't know when, but it's going to happen. And so we actually had right before I ran, there was a issue that came up with the City Hall that was tough, or the city that was tough. It was non-citizens voting was the issue that came up right as I was running. It was tough. It was easy for me to know where I stood on it. Non-citizens voting, yes, 100% on board with that. It was tough in that there were threats made to the council members. It was a really tough time for the council to go through that. But that was sort of the background of my initial running. And I felt very much connected to these issues and wanted to take a stand, and ran because of that. I will also say two more things. One, I also have a huge passion for just talking about dog parks and bike trails and trash, right? Because trash is actually really important. So that's a big thing. And two, it helps me professionally. Running, one of the main reasons I professionally wanted to run, I actually too am an introvert, Letty, though I am a fundraiser as well. So I always joke that I am an introvert leading extroverted life, because it's, you kind of just have to do it. So I've gotten used to it. But I'd noticed that as a fundraiser, I always was selling, if you will, other organizations' thoughts. It wasn't my thought itself. It was, I was talking about what the Girl Scouts were doing or what the League was doing or that sort of thing. What I wanted to professionally grow on is coming up with my own opinion and sort of seeing it all the way through. Where do I stand on an issue, framing that issue, and then selling that issue to constituents. And so that has been a huge growth for me. And that professionally has meant a lot to me, both as a elected official and just as a professional.
Thanks. Thank you all. Can you all each speak to us about some of the challenges that you face during the campaign or in your time in office? I know a couple of you recently ran unopposed, but if you could talk about any of the challenges of the campaign, even running unopposed, and then some of your early challenges in office.
I'm happy to jump in. So I have had opposition every time. We are all at large, and so we rotate. So there's 7 of us. Sometimes an election is 3 seats up, sometimes 4 seats up. Every time we've had challengers. I would say as a newcomer, that was probably the hardest one, is obviously making a name for yourself, right? So you are relatively unknown. People don't know what your positions are. So I'm a person that likes to do my homework. And so one of the hardest things to do was I wanted to make sure I was very, very well prepared. So I went to every single meeting I could. I took notes, I read. And so don't be afraid to come in to know your stuff. I think that's always really important as a candidate. And so I think as a newcomer, especially the first time around. And then I hate to bring it up, but I certainly was dubbed in our local media as the mommy candidate. And that was ugly. People commented about the way I dressed, the way I looked. And it was always about my appearance as opposed to my qualifications. And so that is an ugly reality of being a young woman running or woman anywhere, I think. And it's something that I think women, I've grown to have a tougher skin as a result of it. And I think that's an unfortunate part of politics. The other thing I didn't really like, and I'll be very frank about it, is there's always the question of, well, how do you juggle kids and work? I'm like, why aren't you asking the men that? Because there are just as many dads who are running, and that should be a question that everyone has to field, not just the mommy candidate. So those are 2 kind of unfortunate, I think, downsides, but I think those are things that there's certainly women trailblazing before us that have done it well. So
I'll say like the biggest challenge, especially for my campaign, was I ran unopposed, but nobody knew me here at all. And then also it was COVID. So like you couldn't do the traditional door knocking, campaign events. I mean, even though it is a really hyper local community, this is a pretty tight knit community here, and people, especially being new, people don't even understand or know what the ANC is. So it was, that was a little bit challenging, but I was able to work with or answer, like get endorsed by Greater Washington, Ward 3 bikes, Ward 3 bike initiative. So that was one of the ways I was able to like sort of get around that and have my name known. Also, just honestly, just having the courage to run at all, I think was like the biggest barrier. And then once I actually decided, okay, I'm going to do this, people were really willing to help. My husband helped collect signatures for me. Some of my friends also did that. The former commissioner also was happy to help collect signatures for me. So luckily, because this is a local, it wasn't a competitive race. I knew I was going to win, but I wanted, like Letty said, to be prepared and to put my best foot forward, and also like put a website together and all this sort of thing. Like, I think a lot of people don't necessarily do that at the local, at the ANC level, because especially if you run unopposed. I made campaign signs so people could like see what who I was, because I wanted people to know that I took this seriously, that this is an important role, especially for our community here. So I think some of those challenges, especially being in COVID, was hard, but also really good because it forced me to like put myself out there.
I love that. I'll tell 2 quick stories about this. The first is when I ran, I mentioned the non-citizens voting was a big issue that was in the city, and I actually originally wasn't going to take a stance on it, and was just but realized as I was sitting through the meetings, I too, like Letty, went to all the meetings I could and listened to everything, that I would rather take a stand and lose votes than to not take a stand and get votes that I, in the long run, didn't want, if you will. And I do not regret that for multiple reasons. One of which, I think it actually, the first election was competitive between, there were 4 of us running for 2 seats, and one was definitely going to get it and one wasn't. So it was really between me and this other gentleman, and he didn't take a stance. And I think it was one of the big reasons that put me apart. And I also think because I was a woman, I actually had multiple people that said, "You're a woman, I'm going to vote for you," which is, I want to make sure that point gets out to everyone. And then 2, I really do appreciate knowing that the votes I have are the votes that I'm glad to have. You know, if I lose someday because of votes that or if I lose votes for good reasons, if you will, I'm okay with that. Like if I want to win because I got the votes that I'm happy and proud to get. The other story I'll talk about is so I mentioned that I have always worked in female organizations, and so I had found myself sitting with the president of the university, UMD, University of Maryland, with a bunch of other men. The mayor of College Park, city manager, a bunch of high executives at the university. And I realized that I, for the first time in my professional career, was sitting in a room full of men, and that had never happened to me before. And I was like, got very taken back. And the reason it was significant is that the issue that I had asked to put on the agenda was sex trafficking. And we had spent the first 20 minutes talking about literally frat boys and business development. So they were very like male oriented like things that the president is talking about. And I'm sitting there looking at the mayor going, maybe I can take sex trafficking, because it is actually an issue in College Park, because we are 495, huge transient area. And so it's a big issue. I'm like, maybe I can take it off. Here I am with the woman issue. And I'm self-doubting myself as I'm sitting here. And I had to talk, it took me a while, I had to talk myself off the ledge and said, no, Kate, lives are at stake here. This is extremely important issue. You need to bring this up. So I was able to shift in my head from, you know, how do we take it off the agenda to how do we present it in a way that people will hear me, right? How do I bring this up so that it's not seen as the woman issue, or it's seen as less important than frat boys? And I was able to, I made these connections in my head because I had done some research the night before. The university has something called the Safe Center, which works with sex trafficking and labor trafficking, and was able to present it in a way that actually made the connection that that really was helpful for that center and helped build them up amongst the with the president. So I say those to say those have been a couple of the challenges that have come in. It's a very female oriented, but a couple of the challenges I've addressed or I've had to deal with.
Thank you. I'm gonna actually ask you guys a question. I'd love to hear about what a typical day is for you as an elected official. As you all mentioned, these are not necessarily full-time paid positions. So I'd love to hear whoever wants to go first.
I can jump in first. Yeah, the days are, so it's, for me, it's all about I think of sprints, right? So I'm sprinting here with College Park. I'm sprinting here with, opposed to like running a marathon. I'm doing little bits here with College Park, little bits here with work or family. And so I actually went to grad school part-time when I worked. So I was working full-time, going to grad school part-time. And so that really helped prepare me. So I highly recommend if anyone has the privilege of being able to do that, it actually, I think, helps in terms of work-life balance in the long run. And so, I mean, last night I was at a meeting till midnight, right? So Tuesday nights are our meetings. So we were there till it was a long one. And then we have a budget meeting on Saturday. So, but next Tuesday we have off. So it's every week we meet, either it's a work session or a full-on meeting, and we typically go to about 10. So it's not something that I do every day, but it is something I do obviously every week, and have, there are weeks that are more intense than other weeks. I will say I actually don't find the scheduling to be an issue. It's the energy suck for me that's an issue, sort of the negative. Letty talked a little bit about sort of the negative energy that came at her. I've also dealt with some negative energy that has been really hard to process. And so that has been sort of affects my schedule and affects sort of my day-to-day more than the actual scheduling of things. I hope that answers the question.
I'll jump in. I also, the ANC also is it's an unpaid part-time role, although it absolutely, the other council members, it could be it definitely is a full-time job. One of the biggest challenges, and I'm brand new to this, is trying to understand that sort of work-life balance. I do have a full-time job that is, I have lots of clients that I meet with. So I really I'm learning right now how to organize my time, because I sit on we just launched a schools and universities committee. I'm on the housing and neighborhoods committee. I just was also nominated as vice chair. There's an executive committee. So there's lots, along with our regular monthly meetings. So there's a lot of preparation that needs to go in to, you know, prepping for each one of those meetings, making sure I'm up to date on what the issues or topics are. I think one of the, just going back to a little bit of the challenges, like DC is huge, and there's so many different issues, like zoning issues, there's the trash issues, there's like working with DDOT, and like, you know, you have to do your homework on so many, there's the budget that's coming up, and like I'm definitely not an expert on all of those things. And so trying to like catch up to become an expert, or at least be credible enough to when a constituent is asking you a question about it, you sort of have to know where to go. So I think that's been, and there's not really a great handbook for like, how do you learn about all the different things that the city is doing, from like schools to trash. And so that has been a pretty steep learning curve, but it's actually been really fun and really great to sort of understand those issues. And, you know, one of the things I'm really trying to work on is making sure I'm getting back to my constituents and being more forward thinking with my constituents, and hosting like town halls. Hopefully I'll have one next month, so that so I really can hear from the community. The other thing that is challenging is just the email volume. There is so much email, and between my personal email, my work email, and the ANC email, like it is a lot. So I honestly have not figured this out yet, but I'm giving myself a little bit of break, because it's only done this for like one quarter. So I'm hoping in the next couple of months, I'll be able to figure it out.
It is very much a steep learning curve, Alex. And so I remember it was like drinking from a fire hose, because you're going to all these meetings and you're like, I know nothing about land use and traffic calming and, you know, whatever it is that we're dealing with, but I was learning so much. And so I love to learn. And so it was always very fulfilling. But like the other folks said, it is not meant to be a full-time job here in Falls Church, but there are days when it certainly feels like it. And like any other position, I think it is what you make of it, right? And so if you want to invest a bunch of time into it, you can certainly make it a full-time job. In Falls Church, we are paid $9,000 a year. So most people have jobs on the side. My other job is mom right now. And especially during COVID with my kids doing hybrid learning, my days are filled with kids and being part-time third grade teacher at times. But I would say for a typical week, our council meets every Monday night. And so it's a combination of public hearings when we cast votes and work sessions, but we meet pretty religiously every Monday night throughout the whole year. We get a couple of weeks off in August and a couple of weeks off in December, and that's about it. We also all serve as liaisons to various boards and commissions in the city. We also play roles in regional boards and commissions. And so a typical week, so the first 2 weeks of the month, I usually have evening meetings 4 nights a week or so. And so it becomes a pretty demanding schedule, but very doable if you have a day job, right? So you could come home, have dinner with your family, and then hop on to an evening call, especially during COVID when we've done everything virtually. And actually, in some ways, it's made it more accessible for a lot of people because you're not fighting traffic or having to drive anywhere. Other things that I do, we don't have staff. So that's the other thing. If you are in a bigger jurisdiction like Arlington or Fairfax, they often have an aide. In the smaller localities, we were paid less, and we actually don't have staff. And so I handle all of my own emails, all of my social media and whatnot. That's all me. But I think citizen engagement and managing constituency is really important. And so I actually carve time out of my week to write a weekly newsletter or blog post that goes out to everyone I represent. I also hold office hours. So pre-COVID times, I try to do office hours once a month around kind of various spots in the city just to make it easy to access for various people. So those are things I've just kind of built into my schedule to make myself more accessible to them. But yeah, it really varies, but I would say pretty reliably 3 to 4 nights a week. Meetings, as Kate said, sometimes, especially if it's budget season, we'll go till midnight. We went till 11 o'clock this past week. We've had meetings go into the next day. So I think it just depends on the time of year, but like any other job, it ebbs and flows, and it is what you make of it too.
Thank you all. This next question is for both Kate and Letty. So the two of you have been reelected. can you tell us why you decided to run again and how this term is shaping up differently than your first term?
Sure, I'm happy to go. So luckily in Falls Church, our terms are 4 years. And so at least it makes the campaigning less daunting because you're like, gosh, if I just make it through 6 months of campaigning, then I have 4 years. And so I'll be, again, frank, government is slow sometimes. And so things that I wanted to get done in 4 years just didn't get done. And as I looked at kind of what I wanted to leave behind, I saw that there was more to do. And so I thought, gosh, I'll re-up again. But it was really a hard decision the second time because as my kids get older, I am more sensitive to their privacy and I think their mom being in the spotlight. So when we go out, to the grocery store, sometimes people, especially pre-COVID when you weren't masked, people would recognize you and start talking to you about potholes and trash. And as my kids got older, I was more sensitive to that. And I wanted to make sure they were comfortable with their mom being in that role, playing a role in, for example, deciding, money that goes to school budgets that impact their teachers. In a very small community, all those decisions can feel a little fraught sometimes. And so that decision the second time around to run was harder because it was more of a family decision that I wanted to include them in. But I just saw more opportunity. And I think that one of the things about local government, it is also very gratifying. We had a couple big decisions that we were making in my first term to build a new high school. And that's a really big undertaking for any community, but especially in a small community like ours. And we were still going through that process at the time. And so I'm like, I wanted to be around to see that all the way through. And government does not work as fast as the private world. And so I just wanted to make sure that I was part of the decision-making and all the important things and legacy we were leaving behind.
Yeah, I will echo a lot of what Letty said. Our terms are 2 years, unfortunately, and I have been trying to get them to move to 4 years, but it is not successful yet. 2 years is hard. I'm getting ready now. We'll be running this fall potentially, and so I still haven't quite made a decision, but I am running until I decide not to, opposed to waiting and then deciding I want to run later, and not having planned. I like I said, the second time, I actually make the decision at the last minute. My mayor was not happy with me, but I was running unopposed, so that made the decision a little easier to run for re-election. It took me, I would say, 2 years to really get oriented. So my first term, I was really understanding the process, like they said, the fire hose and such. And so it's been, and Letty mentioned something that I am so impressed with, and that is that she sends a weekly email, which is very difficult to do, our weekly blog post. And so I'm really impressed with that. I've been contemplating doing a monthly something and reaching out monthly, which I feel like is as much as I can handle. But so that's part of the shift, Monica, you asked, is figuring out how, now that I've really learned as much as I can, how am I sort of coming into my own leadership, and what does that look like moving forward? And then also say there are 2 newer members, and I've really started to shift to helping them get them oriented and on board. So those have been the 2 major differences in my first term and my second term.
Thanks. And then, so Alex, you're newly elected. Can you share with us what's been the most surprising in your first few months in office?
Yes, I mean, I guess I'll say a couple of things. One, because it's local, like, of course, if you get elected, like you're responsible, but I think the weight of that responsibility really hits you once you're in office. You're like, oh, right, that's me that has to like do all of these things. The other thing that surprised me is that I guess I thought that not just DC government, but also like it's myself and 7 other commissioners in our district. I guess I thought there was going to be more structure and more governance process of like when do we have to come together to make a decision, and when do you as a individual commissioner need to make a decision, and there's no real governance around that. So that is something that like I'm actually taking the lead on. We don't have a really great like way to communicate with the public, so I am standing up a comms committee to be able to do that. So we have a better Twitter account and Facebook, and our website is updated, because some of that stuff like I said, because it's a part-time role has not necessarily been taken care of over the past couple of years. So my goal by the end of my term is to leave like a legacy of like a real infrastructure. Like, for example, how do we communicate with each other? We just started implemented Slack, for example, so that all the commissioners can get on one tool and have one place rather than like trying to dig through your email box. The other thing that's been surprising is that you really can make change, not necessarily quickly, but like, for example, we realized that like this, we're not understanding what the schools and universities in our area really wanted or needed, because people had not really reached out to, or former commissioners really had not reached out to them. And so, I was able to help stand up a schools and universities committee. And now we're really, we met on Tuesday, and we had somebody from the State Board of Education help us understand what the issues are, especially in this time of COVID. There's mental health resources. And because the budget is coming up, we're going to draft a resolution in support of getting more mental health resources or counselors, PPE, all of those things. So it's been really great to see, like, as Letty said, it's really gratifying that like you really can be the change in your local community. And it's as much effort as you put in is what you're going to get out of it. And knowing that your constituents really do look to you for a range of things, is really fun and exciting. And one of the things I love the most is talking to constituents. It is so much fun to talk to people and to really understand what their wants and needs are for the community, and try to take that back and figure out how to solve those issues or challenges. So that's the thing that's been surprising, and I didn't know I was going to love it this much. I'm like, I wish this was my real full-time job that paid.
Alex, thank you so much for sharing that. I like the juxtaposition between folks that have been doing it for a bit and newly in the position. So at least inspiring for me. I would love to hear from each of you what advice you would give to a woman exploring a run for office. Alex, if you want to start, since you're just went.
I was so afraid so long. I was like I said, I was like, why me? No, no, no. Like, that's somebody else, like, I'm not policy, I'm not blah, 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 all the things, I'm enough money, to run. And just having the courage to just avoid that. Somehow that like shifted in me, and just it, like, I think is really important. There's lots of different organizations that when I was thinking about running in Maryland, I like a 2-day workshop through Emerge Maryland. That's a resource I definitely recommend, who are trying to get like women to get into politics. There's different ways that you can do it, especially now. I follow She Should Run. I really just think like your voice matters no matter what age you are, even if you've never run for office before, even if you don't know all the issues, that doesn't really matter. I think there's lots of men who don't know anything and run for office. And
Alex, it looks like you have frozen. I'm not sure if you can.
being able to run, like having the courage to run, I think is really important. So be the change, I guess.
I can go next if that's good. Couple things I echo I took a training. I can't remember the organization, but I took a training, and I know a lot of people that have gone through the Emerge program, so that's fantastic. I also would recommend join a committee, so you don't have to. Your first doesn't have to be elected office. I was on the Advisory Planning Commission before I ran, and so there are a lot of committees you can join and get engaged in that way. I was also involved in my community, my community association. And then I also, this book, I know I sent it to Sarah, so she'll send out Represent. This came out since I ran, and so, but it's just so much fun. And so I recommend, I think this is one of the first that's out there. It's like a workbook, and it looks like a lot of fun. So, and it talks about the dreaded fundraising, which we know is always my campaign. We'll get to brass tacks on here. My campaign, the first time I ran, I think I spent $2,000. So it wasn't a lot of money. And then the second time I ran, I think I spent 200 because I mentioned I was unopposed. So I didn't, and I used the same signs. And so, yeah. And the other thing I'll say is that for me, it was messy. Like campaigning was messy. I was out and I was talking to people, and you never know who you were going to talk to. I love talking to residents too, but sometimes I had bad interactions. Sometimes I had good interactions. So it was just, having to just eat a lot of chocolate and keep moving. So good luck. Please run. Please run.
Yeah, I was going to add that a good way to actually try it out, I always recommend, is that boards and commissions are a great way to get involved and dip your toes in. And so if you have a particular passion around the environment, I'm sure there's an environmental, council or transportation, and you really want to get more bike lanes, there's probably one. And those are often volunteer positions. In Falls Church, they are usually monthly meetings. And so it's a great way just to try it out and say like, gosh, is this something that I'm interested in doing further? But I think a theme you've probably heard from Kate and Alex, me, is that women have to be asked. And I think now as a women leader, I am certainly more conscious of that, especially when bringing the next generation in. Women often think they're not qualified, or they're daunted by the campaigning, whether they'll even win or what they'll do. And so I am now chair of our appointments committee. And so I actually help select people on boards and commissions. And that's something very deliberately I've done to make sure that we are succession planning in the city, that we were picking and helping people and encouraging people to get involved, because you really have to have the next generation step up. And everyone had a first time around, right? And so it seems scary, but we are here for you. Another thing that we've done is that, at least in Northern Virginia, we have a nice network of regional elected women. So we get together informally just to support each other and share learnings of like, how are you working on this accessory housing ordinance? Oh, here's what we're doing in Falls Church. What can we learn from Alexandria, Arlington? And so that informal network also really helps. And so try to find other women, find a friend who might want to, go to a meeting with you, because it is a scary experience campaigning, especially for small jobs like this. Can be a little scary, like building a website, learning campaign finance rules, getting yard signs. There are other people who've done it before. Don't afraid to ask for help and ask questions.
One thing I just wanted to add is, if you live in DC, there are so many open positions that people do not run for. And honestly, I ran, like I said, I ran unopposed, Kate ran unopposed, like, you won't necessarily lose if you just step up. And so there was really, if you want to do it, there was really no downside for me. And so I just really want to encourage people to and we need people to fill those positions, because local politics is local. There's lots of stuff happening at the federal level, but the things that impact you are really important, are happening in your community. So if you are interested, just really get involved. And I think the suggestions that both Kate and Letty made are really great. But like I said, the ANC is a really great way to get involved. So if you live in DC, step up and try to run.
Okay, thank you. I'm about to open the floor for questions. And again, if there are any last minute comments, any of the panelists would like to share, I'd love to hear them. I will just add a sort of food for thought that connects with something that each of our panelists has shared about, thinking, well, I certainly can't be the one. And this is very common, as we know, of women. And so I read something that said largely the difference between positions for which women apply, or for which in this case they run, is that and versus men is a man will look at a title and judge himself qualified based on the title. A woman will look at all the qualifications for the position and disqualify herself because she doesn't meet one of them. And so it's a real difference of approach, where I kind of think I can do whatever this job sounds like it is, versus there are 10 things on this list. One of them sounds like something I couldn't possibly do, so I probably should step away. And I think we see a lot of that one in women applying for leadership positions, but also, and well, it's sort of a generalization. There's a lot of reality to that, because we live in a hypercritical society, and it's particularly critical of women. And so we do a lot of disqualifying of ourselves across many areas of life, but certainly across public office. And so, as we move into the question and answer session, I just would, encourage our panelists to give some thought to, helping us reframe our thinking and qualify ourselves. So I think I saw one question, and I haven't been able to completely follow the chat, but I know there was one question in the chat of the panelists, which was asking if you had an interest in pursuing other elected office in the future. And then we'll go to open questions.
I'm asked this regularly, so at least I'll give you the same answer I share with everyone else. I certainly have no political aspirations for other jobs. Like I said, politics is honestly the last thing I ever thought I'd do. I think I do local because it is so easy to see the results at the end of the day, right? When someone talks to you about a sidewalk and you get that sidewalk built, you can see it right there. I think it's much harder to see that impact at maybe the state and national level, even those may be sexier, but I guess you never say never, so.
I can go. I actually do have further political aspirations. I wanted to do the ANC just to see if I liked it, this is something I felt like I could do to qualify myself. You know, I would love to run for city council here in DC. If DC ever becomes a state, I would love to run for governor. That sort of just like came to me because I think I was listening to an interview with Stacey Abrams, and I'm pretty sure there's been very few female governors, period. And I don't think there's been any Black governors in the history of the US. And I'm not sure if that's true or not, but there's been very few. And so after really seeing like Stacey Abrams and all of these other incredible women run for office, again, I keep thinking like, why not? Because watching these really amazing women like be able to break those barriers and really be the change. I'm just, like I said, I know Stacey Abrams was so inspired by her and her organizing power. I think I want to see the next generation reflected and think that they can do it as well. So I was inspired by Hillary Clinton. I was inspired by the AOCs of the world, who's like much younger than I am. Like, so I think, yes, I really want to potentially move up if possible.
And we'll be cheering you on, Alex.
I love that. I love it. I am considering when the mayor moves on to run for mayor, and that's probably as far up as I will get, but I am excited. Thank you. I'm excited. I actually think I would enjoy that position a lot. I tend to like more, like if I ever were to, I would probably run for more like a county executive than a legislative. Like I like the executive aspect of it more than the legislative aspect of it. And I'm actually in Prince George's County. I know there's a question about Montgomery, but I'm actually in Prince George's. So I may have connections in Montgomery, but yeah, I'll look.
Yeah, sorry, Kate. I did know that. I just wanted to get Shaquita connected with you directly.
It's a stone throw. It's right there. Yeah.
That is something I was going to bring up this, Sarah, because Kate just mentioned the difference between legislative versus executive. And so especially as elected officials, we're supposed to set policy kind of up here. But I think depending, again, what you want to make of your job, you can roll your sleeves up and get into the weeds too, and get into really details of how city governments run. And so I think as you get into it, again, it's really eye-opening just to learn so much and figure out whether you want to set policy or whether you actually want to help govern and manage too.
I think an interesting question that came kind of up in the chat is how can other women support women in their pursuit for office? You know, my shirt today says empowered women empower women. So I'm wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about that.
I mean, for me, I would say just show up for women. Like so many people need, like, especially when you're running your campaigns, you need help to be able to do the door knocking, to be able to build campaign flyers, to like just have a shoulder to cry on if like you're having a really bad day because somebody said that you looked fat in the press, whatever it is. I mean, that hasn't happened to me, but I'm sure it will eventually. So really just show up for women, donate to their campaigns. That stuff matters. It really, really matters. And I think if you can show up for women and be there in those ways, like that's really gonna make that really can make the difference. That donation, that one door knock can really make the difference or make or break a campaign. As we've seen across the country, like these elections are really, really close and really, really tight. And so just being able to show up for them, I think is really critical.
I was going to add that, you know, while no one likes to talk about money, right now, the way campaigns work is you do have to support them financially. And so that's a big part of, you know, getting women elected. But I think once you are there, be conscious of kind of backing each other up. And so I'm privileged to serve with 2 other women on city council. And so there's 3 of us. And so when someone, you know, has a suggestion and it's a good one, amplify their voice and be conscious of that, because often, you know, we're the ones who get interrupted or mansplained. And so it's important to support each other in those informal ways as well.
Yeah, I echo all of that. And just to tag on to that last thing Letty said, I think, and I mentioned earlier, energy, right? And sort of the negative energy that comes to me in dealing with that. I feel and I'm generalizing, but as a woman, I probably internalize that a little bit more. And so I've definitely leaned on my female, I mean, right before this call, I was talking to one of my co-council members about it. And I actually am going to reach out to another female co-council member because it's, I think we see it differently than a lot of the men do. And so being there for each other is really, really important. But yeah, and money, I always love talking about money. So please, please donate to people's campaigns. And it's important.
A couple more questions came through on chat. Can we talk about really, Shaquita asked, I appreciate her very pointed, I appreciate this question. DMV is such a transient area for many young women trying to get into local and state politics. Are there very specific ways or steps to get started? If you have any, please share.
So I'll reiterate again, I think boards and commissions are a great way because those are mostly volunteer. I think Alex said there are often vacancies on various boards and commissions. And so whether you have expertise or just passion or interest or curiosity, those are great ways to dip your toes in. And a lot of them are 4-year terms, at least in Falls Church, but we often have ones that are more task forces. And so, for example, we just had a police use of force committee that was kind of a 6-month thing. And we had, I think, the most number of people ever apply to it because of the national conversation around police reform. And so that was a really great, impactful thing that you can do for 6 months and be a member of, one of 7 or 9 people and actually create recommendations that come to us on city council that we're hoping to enact. So look for those opportunities too. They always don't have to be 4-year terms or things that you have to run for.
I would say that, I mean, there's tons of organizations that are, whether it's, depending on whatever party you're part of, like there's a DC Democratic Party, there's lots of different ways to get involved. I think, my advice is just find whatever you're passionate about. If it's bike lanes, like join the, Ward 3 bike lane committee. If it's about streets and sidewalks and, making sure that we have clean water in DC, do that. If it's, housing in neighborhoods, like housing issues, like there's a ton of different ways to get involved. And once you just start talking to different people, you start to meet more people. And then, eventually there might be a position or a role or even a paid role that you might be interested in participating in. It doesn't always have to be running for office. There's lots of jobs in city government that need to be filled and really need like smart, competent people who are willing to do the work. And that also helps to really understand the process because that's one of the most critical things about this role is there's so many processes to understand. So if you are thinking about thinking about running for office and want to leg up, if you are an expert in like housing policy, that's definitely going to help you help you run and potentially win your campaign.
Oh, great. And I'll add to that, get to know your current local elected officials. I actually have a whole group of people that I kind of informally have a relationship with them as sort of an advisory board, if you will. And so there's some of the people I go to when I'm struggling with something or trying to figure something out and turn to them for advice. And so getting to know your own local elected officials will give you insight into, because they probably need support too, in terms of, one, just, the mental, like, good job sort of support, but also having people that they trust to say, this dog park is better here than here, right? Whatever those issues are, to have someone from a different perspective give them some thoughts on it is always really helpful. So that's another way that informally you could get engaged.
I did want to add like civic groups. And so whether it's like a league of women voters, often neighborhoods often have associations, condo boards, those are often, really impactful ways to actually just try this out too, without having been in government.
Thank you so much. We're hitting our hour mark, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So these kind of questions, we have 2 more quick questions. They kind of go together. I'll combine them and then we'll wrap up. I always like to end on on a high note. So I would love to hear one issue that you're really passionate about, and then also what has been so far your biggest accomplishment while in office.
I can quickly jump in. I mentioned dog park. We have a dog park that's, I have a young dog that actually just tried to break in a few minutes to my office. And that was one of the reasons I had come on, and it is about to open, and I cannot wait. We also have a lot of development and City Hall, a new City Hall in our city, and development, actually business development, has been one of my biggest passions. And so I've really enjoyed, especially small business, bringing it into the city.
Happy to go next. So when I think about thing I'm most proud of, I think in the past 5 years, Falls Church has undertaken a really, really ambitious capital plan. And when I say capital, I mean things like school buildings and libraries. So we built a new high school. We've pretty much renovated every school. We're in the process of renovating our library. We just finished City Hall. Pretty much every public building in the city we have touched and improved. Because when I joined, we had a backlog of all those improvements over time. We just weren't keeping up with it. And that's really, really expensive and complicated and hard to do. And I'm quite proud that we were able to pull it off, especially for a little city like ours. In terms of the area that I'm really passionate about, I would say it's affordable housing. And I mean that in affordable with both big A and little a. I think everyone knows that the Northern Virginia and DC area in general is just becoming increasingly unaffordable. And as a first generation immigrant, I certainly believe that I think housing and education are both really important pathways to kind of lowering and making the field more equitable for people. And so I want to make sure that Falls Church and everywhere else is the kind of community where people of all kinds can afford to live. We don't create, sprawl, for example. Everyone laments about traffic in the DC area. Well, if we can create more housing where the jobs are, people wouldn't have to go out to the outer suburbs, and we wouldn't have, transportation issues. We wouldn't have environmental issues with people having to be in their cars all the time. So I think housing is so linked to all those things that we all care about. And I think, especially if you're inside the Beltway, I feel like we need to do our part and actually create more affordable housing for people so that people can live closer where they work and have better lifestyles at the end of the day too.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. I guess I'll start with things I'm proud of. In the quarter that I've been in office, I've actually been able to pass 2 resolutions, which has been really exciting. One was the Schools and Universities Committee, and the second was there's a small community organization who's trying to increase access to healthy food in our area, especially for the elderly and those who are low income. And so they're starting a food distribution center, like a food pantry in our area. So I was, drafted the resolution, I was like, oh my God, how do I do this? So I was really proud to pass that, and it got unanimous support from all the other commissioners. So that's really great. So in the short amount of time, I've actually done something. So I'm like, yes. And the second thing also, housing, as someone who has a full-time job, I cannot afford to buy a house in my neighborhood. It's impossible. And so affordable housing is definitely one of the things I'm really, really passionate about. Housing, of course, is linked to healthcare. If you don't have a safe place to live, you do not have health. And so it's really important to have safe neighborhoods, to make sure that people have access to these, to affordable housing, like you said, capital A and little a, like, can you buy a house here? Can you afford to live in an apartment in this area? DC is so expensive for students, for the elderly, for even just working parents, for people who don't have children. And we want, if our city is going to grow and be strong, then we need to have housing that is affordable. Otherwise, families are going to move out of the city. That's tax dollars that moves out. That means your schools aren't getting funded, all of those things. So that's something I'm definitely passionate about, and we are working towards. Last year, before I was elected, I was in the Housing and Neighborhoods Committee, like I said, and we, wrote a resolution to support, the rent control bill, to stop the moratorium, or to support the moratorium on evictions, all of those things. Hopefully together will really help push the city council and the mayor forward to be able to create affordable housing in DC, throughout DC.
Thank you. I'm going to say some real, Monica, did you have anything that you'd like to add?
I'll just make a closing remark after you wrap up.
So just wanted to say a quick thank you for everyone for attending today. We know your time is valuable. wanted to let you know that I'll be sending out a follow-up email with a recording of this, plus also all of the women on the panel today agreed to share their contact information if you are interested in contacting them to know more about what they do, and also some resources that they talked about. As always, if you want to further support our work here at the YWCA, we are in the midst of currently promoting for becoming a monthly donor with us. And if you start this month, you receive this really awesome YWCA National Capital Area face mask. So you can find out more about that on our website. And Monica, you can take it from there.
Thanks. Well, I just want to thank everyone who joined us this evening and thank our outstanding panel for their words of inspiration. And I'll just say, as we celebrate Women's History Month, let us commit ourselves to helping more women make history, and then also commit ourselves to being the generation that makes the last decade of first, because we want to normalize women in positions of leadership and elective office and in different places of power in our nation, so that we don't have to keep celebrating first because we have put so many women in office that there are now other people coming behind them. They're the second, the third, the fourth. Just, continue to make history. We thank our panelists for having the courage to take on those leadership positions. And we encourage those on this call to reach out to them so that they can encourage them to have the courage to do the same. We know that great things happen when women lead. We are all coming out of this pandemic, and as we look around the world, one thing is clear. Those countries that have strong women leaderships, either at the most senior level or in senior levels, are the countries that have done the best. And so we know that women can be extraordinary leaders, and we have to be the people who encourage one another. So I look forward to supporting many of your campaigns in the coming months, and look forward to having you join us in any of our upcoming events. So thank you all for joining us this evening. Everyone have a great evening and a happy last week of Women's History Month.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
Take
so
care.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Night, stay safe.